Rav Yechiel Yaakovson was sent by Rav Shach to learn chinuch as a bacher. And the way either they guided him or he figured out on his own to learn chinuch, which of course he became a world-class expert in, was to start at the very, very bottom of the chain. He went to a jail, a prison, a juvenile prison in the Negev, and he got a job as a teacher for juvenile criminals who had been locked up. They have some educational framework in the prison, and he got a job as a teacher there. And he studied the interaction between the teachers and the children, and that's where he began his chinuch career. Interestingly enough, it was not long before he became the warden of the prison because of a relatively sad circumstance. These teenagers whose debates were handled with the knives decided that they didn't like the warden of the prison, and they tossed him over a third-story balcony and broke his back. It wasn't, Baruch Hashem, a life-threatening injury, but it was enough to get him a pension the rest of his life. And at his hospital bed, he had to find a replacement. So there was another law working in Rav Yechiel's favor, at least in the favor of all of us who are benefiting from the experience. As sad as it was for the person who had the job at first. The law was that whoever takes the job as warden has to live in the prison. Since he was the only single person on the staff and no sane person would bring their spouse to live in such an environment, so he took the job and he became a bacher from Panovich, who was the warden of a juvenile prison. Fascinating. So he was describing how he arrived at the conclusion that in human nature, every single person craves discipline. Every single person can be disciplined, and what it is that impedes those who aren't disciplined from being disciplined. So, parenthetically, at one point in his career, he did some kind of mental health intervention for Ezer Mitzion, which is what? A volunteer organization for medical things in Eretz Yisrael. So he told of a story, I'm fast forwarding by decades, where he was called into a house with the police because the children were savagely beating their parents and they needed the police to intercede. And someone who had come with him said, look, you say you can discipline anyone. These children obviously can't be disciplined. Look what's happening in this house. But he actually turned the situation around and proved the direct opposite. These are parents who did not know, sadly, tragically, how to discipline their children. It wasn't children who couldn't be disciplined. These children could be disciplined and eventually were. It's that if one doesn't understand the dynamic and one doesn't understand what to do, the tables can turn. So going back to the jail, he took over the prison and he asked the teachers who worked under him, I think he may have said he had 13 people on the staff, I guess maybe a couple hundred kids, teenagers, and he said to them like this: once in the blue, people listen to you. Once in a while, you actually give a command and the child listens. It almost never happens. I want you to give me at the end of every week a list of every circumstance where someone did listen to something that you said, and I want to collect those papers. And he accumulated a few dozen, I think, chits of paper that said, I asked Yossi to put away his bike, and he actually did it. He wanted the circumstance, the command, and the response only of the times the children listened. He said he was looking for a pattern. He was trying to understand how hardened criminals, whose whole career was built on defying authority, that's how they wound up in the prison in the first place, what would make them, out of the blue, actually listen to a command? That was his goal. So he said he studied the papers, he studied them, and he felt that he was sensing in his subconscious a pattern, but he couldn't put his finger on what the common denominator was in all of the stories that he got. You have to, it's just the brilliance of his educational techniques. It's really mind-boggling. But he described what he did to figure this out. He said, I took large pieces of paper and I summarized each story in about 2 lines. A 17-year-old boy, X, doing this, commanded that, listened in this circumstance, in a number of words, about 2 lines. I wrote them in very big print, he said. And I took all the papers and I laid them out like a deck of cards on the floor of my dining room. And I climbed on my dining room table and I stared at all the papers for 2 hours without moving. He said he felt that if he could reach in his subconscious what it was about all these things just by staring at them, he said after 2 hours he chapped it. He chapped it, and he set out to prove it in an educational conference among educators in Eretz Yisrael, a lot of whom, some of whom had written in universities, I think doctorate theses, claiming that certain people could not be disciplined. And he wanted to prove them wrong, and he invited a whole group of them, a whole team of people from around the country, to witness him disciplining a hardened criminal. That's smart. So he said like this. He was staring at the papers, and he chapped the idea. He decided to implement it. I'll explain in a moment what the common denominator was. But this is how he set up the test. He had a classroom set up in the jail, and he asked the teachers to send the most difficult 2 or 3 children per class. Hardened, violent criminals, teens. So he filled up a classroom with this eclectic group of the creme de la creme of the prison system, and he invited all of these educational experts, put them on through a one-way glass to witness the classroom, and he told them he's going to challenge them. He's going to pick the boy who's the most difficult of the most difficult, and he's going to prove to them that at the first command, the boy will listen immediately without thinking. That was his goal. He hadn't tested it. He had these, I think he said 15 people came from around the country. They were observing the classroom. He steps into the classroom, and he picked the guy. I think it's the same guy who appears in another story, maybe I'll tell it to you another time, who was the ringleader, interestingly enough. I won't digress too much. When the warden gave over the prison to Rav Yechiel at the hospital bed, what he told him was, piece of unbelievably stupid wisdom, he said, listen, the truth is that all these years I don't run the jail. There's a boy named Yossi who runs the jail. Yossi is deadly. All you have to do to make this prison work is hide the fact that he's in charge and you're not, and take orders from him being a 19-year-old inmate. He said, he's too dangerous to start up with, but he's got gangs that control the behavior of everyone in the place. You make him happy, and he keeps the place in order, and that's how it's run. The other story I'll save for another time is how Rav Yechiel left the hospital and immediately set out to destroy Yossi's authority in the underworld of the prison. But in this case, I think it's the same Yossi who appears in a different story, and Rav Yechiel, for this reason, singled him out, and he said to him like this. I have to describe this for the people who are on the phone and can't see my visual presentation. Rav Yechiel steps into the room and he singles out the most hardened gang leader of them all, and he says, Yossi. So the boy lunged half out of his chair, like Pasha, as a reaction just to threaten physical violence. Rav Yechiel himself is a very large individual, but this kid was mamish a mafia leader, and was virtually going to attack him physically from the back of the classroom. So he says, Yossi, and the boy leans out of his chair to pounce. So Rav Yechiel looks at him, and he lifts up his fingers in an odd gesture, and he said to the boy, Taseh kacha ma'etzba. Do the following thing with your hand. So this hardened criminal responded by twisting his body over, and he asked, Ma torte, Ma. He got angry, and he demanded an explanation of what he was supposed to do. But before he could refuse to do it, he had done it. What's the pshat? The murder kazach. Because the Ribbono Shel Olam does control the world, and because discipline and authority that we refer to as Yiras Shamayim is woven into the fabric of the Bria, and because a human being is created with emunah and ava and yira and tznius and chesed, all of these midos are measurements. They're part and parcel of who we are. The word midah means how much. How much should I channel my chesed this way, and how much do I have to restrict it that way? How much should I channel my sense of of outrage at something that's unjust, my midas hadin, how much should I correct and guide with forcefulness, and how much should I restrain it and hold back? How much should I use tznius, and how much sometimes do I have to let someone know about something that maybe is flattering to me? How much kavod? How much restraining kavod? Those are the midas that we're enjoined to use and channel for avodas Hashem. So because discipline is a natural craving, what was it on all those pieces of paper on his dining room floor that he noticed after 2 hours? Chap is a ga'inus. Whenever the children, the teens, the criminals were commanded to do something that they had ever heard of before in their life, they had already been brainwashed to defy it. That's why they were in jail. If you tell them to sit down, to speak nicely, to tuck in their shirt, to behave with respect, to tell the truth, not to steal, then they pull out their knives. But if you give them a command and they don't have time, there's no knee-jerk reaction that they've already been indoctrinated to resist it, before they can well up their rebellion, the kid's already twisting and doing it with his fingers because it's built inside of us.